So welcome. This is really, really nice. Those of you on Zoom, good on you. Nice to have everyone on Zoom. Everyone here, welcome. It's nice to have you. First of all, the Ferreros, we miss you very much and we miss your location, but the show will have to do. And it's nice to have this beautiful Torah gathering here tonight. So first of all, before we start, I just want to put it out there. If anybody wants to sponsor any future classes, if anyone has anything coming up, any birthdays, anniversary of a passing, or anything that you want to sponsor, more than welcome, let me know. Tonight, we are actually dedicating the class to the memory of my great grandfather. I knew him as Zaidi Aaron in stories. I never met him, but this is he and his wife, who many of my cousins are named for, and I am dedicating the class to his memory. No, this was in Europe. This is a very old picture. Yes. That picture was taken, I believe, before the war. Yes. But the memory of his life and his legacy, which is me here today, and they got a beautiful family and a very large extended family, is in the merit of his Torah learning, and we'll bring that into tonight's class. So we are starting this 3-week series, which will be focusing on the Beit Hamikdash. And for those of you who saw the flyer, I'm assuming you all did, the Beit Hamikdash, we're going to focus on the past, the present, and the future. So before we get into the details of what we're going to be covering over the next 3 weeks, starting tonight, and what the Beit Hamikdash really is, why are we talking about this now? So tomorrow morning, very early in the morning, for anybody who likes to wake up really early, grab a breakfast very early before the sun comes up, because tomorrow is a fast day. It's a day that we fast because of the siege around Jerusalem in the temple times was broken, and the enemies of the Jewish people who were intent on destroying the Beit HaMikdash, destroying the temple, I'll explain, had made like a wall, but a wall of soldiers surrounding Israel, surrounding Jerusalem, in an attempt to break through the walls and be able to, come on in, welcome. Yes, it's a sliding door, but it's a little tough. Come inside, welcome. Grab some cookies, have a seat. So well, listen, I always say, come for the cookies, stay for the Torah. So the enemies of the Jewish people who were intent on destroying the temple broke through the walls that were protecting Jerusalem on the 17th of Tammuz, which is tomorrow on the Hebrew calendar, and began the destruction of Jerusalem, of the temple. Many Jewish lives were lost. Many Jews were taken as captive. And ultimately, at the end of the 3 weeks, is Tisha B'Av, which is the saddest day of the Jewish calendar, which will be in 3 weeks from now. And that is the day when we mark the destruction of the temple. And these 3 weeks have particular significance when it comes to rituals that we observe during the 3 weeks of things that we do not do during this time, because it is a time of mourning. So we're going to get to that soon, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. But in order for us to really fully understand what we're missing, what are we sad that was destroyed? What are we lacking in our lives without the Beit HaMikdash? In order for us to truly understand why we mourn its destruction, we need to understand what it was and what the point of still mourning it today is. So there's a story that's told about Napoleon. Now, I cannot verify the details of the story, but it's a good story nonetheless. They say that Napoleon was headed towards Israel in his conquest. And it was during the summer months, and he passed the synagogue in a particular country where he was. I believe it was France, but don't quote me. And he heard loud crying coming from inside the synagogue. And he asked the soldiers, what's going on in there? So they went to investigate. They look inside and they see that there are crowds of Jews sitting on the floor of the synagogue, crying, praying and crying. So they went back and they told Napoleon what they saw. And he says, go find out what's going on. So the soldiers go and they start asking some questions. And they're told that the Jews are commemorating the destruction of the temple and they're mourning the destruction of the Jewish temple. And he says, Jewish temple? I haven't heard about any Jewish temple being destroyed recently. What are they talking about? So it is explained to them, not recently, but about 2,000 years ago, there was a temple in Jerusalem that stood and it was destroyed. And Napoleon says, a nation that cries with such sincerity for a temple that was destroyed 2,000 years ago is a nation that I will never be able to destroy. Now, what Napoleon recognized is the truth, that we as a nation are so intertwined with the Beit Hamikdash. And the Holy Temple, the Beit Hamikdash, is so intertwined into the fabric of Jewish life that even though we have not had a physical temple in the last 2,000 years, and I use that number roughly, it's not an exact date, we mourn and we observe laws of mourning that are similar to someone who is sitting Shiva, someone who is mourning the loss of a loved one, with that same feeling, with that same personal sense of loss. Because the loss of the Beit HaMikdash, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said that every day that the Beit HaMikdash is not rebuilt, it's as if it's being destroyed right now. It's burning before our eyes. And we are now entering the period of the 3 weeks when we are doing things or not doing things in order to feel the destruction of the temple. But first, let's understand, what did it feel like to have a temple? Where did the temple originate? What's the concept of the Holy Temple? And over the next 3 classes, tonight we're going to discuss the meaning of the temple itself, the past. Next week, we'll discuss the concept of the destruction of the temple, the lessons that we can learn from that, and all of that. And the following class will focus on the future, on the rebuilding of the temple. But if you've been to one of my classes before, you know that the lessons will all be interspersed in between. So let's go back in time. The Jewish people are in the desert after the giving of the Torah, and the nation of Israel, having just received the 10 commandments, having just been taken out of Egypt and witnessing the most wondrous miracles, the nation of Israel commits a grave sin. Many, many, many Jews were involved in the sin of the golden calf. And the antidote to this sin, what God instructed the Jewish people, is to build a Mishkan, a temple. It was not a permanent structure because the Jews were traveling in the desert, but the temple would serve as a physical presence for the Jewish people to have a space for spiritual connection, a place where we can come, experience divinity, see godliness, feel spirituality, and connect to Hashem in a space where physicality and spirituality combine. And the Mishkan was built. And the Mishkan, this temple, the temporary structure of the temple, traveled with the Jewish people throughout the 40 years in the desert. It traveled with them into the land of Israel, and it remained in Israel during the times when the Jews were conquering the land and the Jews were settling into Israel. And it was first in one city, and then it was in another city. It ended up in 4 different locations. Primarily, it was in Shiloh. Shiloh was the place where the temple, the Mishkan, was temporarily, permanently located, shall I say. It wasn't the Beit Hamikdash that was built as a structure, but it was there for 44 years, I believe. Let me look that up. These are inside Israel, yes. And, Numbers and me were not such good friends, but I actually did write it down. Yeah, Numbers and me were really not good friends. So the last city where the Mishkan was in Givon. That was for 44 years. Yeah, as I said, it sounded wrong. And it was in Shiloh for 369 years. So for a very, very large period of time, the Mishkan was in Shiloh. It was also in Gilgal for 14 years. It was in Nov for 13 years. But the mainstay of the Mishkan was in Shiloh when the Jewish people were in Israel for this tremendous amount of time. And then King David, when the Jewish people were settled and in control, and David HaMelech, King David, was the king, then it was time, he felt, for the Beit Hamikdash to be built. And he began the process of preparing for the building of the Beit Hamikdash. Now, if we think about what the Beit Hamikdash was, think about it like a structure like the size of a football field. It was a very large structure. It was on a very big area, on Har Habayit, which is literally the house, the mountain of the house, literally, which we call the Temple Mount. And this is the same mountain where Yaakov Avinu had a dream. When Yaakov Avinu, for anyone who remembers the Torah class when we discussed the Torah portions, when Yaakov, Jacob, our forefather, was running away from his brother Esav, who wanted to kill him, brotherly love, right? And he went to sleep on this mountain while he was running away. And he had a dream. And in the dream, there was a ladder, and there were angels going up to heaven, and there were angels coming back down. And when he woke up from his dream, he realized what a holy place he was on. And he made a mizbeach. He made an altar, and he brought sacrifices to God. And this mountain is the same exact location where the Beit HaMikdash was built, where the temple stood, and where the karbanot, the sacrifices, were brought daily in the temple. And this location is so holy, and it was always meant to be for the Beit HaMikdash. And David HaMelech started the preparation of building the Mishkan, and he started gathering a huge amount of supplies and materials, and he started, making the plans, and he was in contact with the prophet of the time, and he wanted to start building the Beit HaMikdash. And Natan Hanavi, the prophet Natan, told him that he cannot be the one to build the Beit HaMikdash. It would be his son Shlomo, King Solomon, who would actually build the Beit Hamikdash. In fact, King Solomon, who built the Beit Hamikdash, did not even use any of the materials that his father, David HaMelech, had prepared. Now, this sounds like a very interesting, maybe strange historical fact. But the fact that David HaMelech was not the one who built the Beit HaMikdash, and Shlomo HaMelech was, understanding why and understanding the dynamic of that situation gives us an insight into what the entire Beit HaMikdash represented. So why was the prophet reluctant to allow King David to build the Beit HaMikdash? King David was a powerful, prominent, dominant leader. But most of his life was engaged in combat. He fought wars. He conquered enemies. And that was his purpose. That was his job as leader. And that's how he protected the Jewish people. And that's how he made the Jewish people into, hello, welcome, come inside. That is how, better late than never, come inside. On the table with pleasure, help yourself. Always time for cookies. You know what, Tamar, do you mind just sliding the door closed? Because they're going to do Arvit and we won't hear them. They won't hear us. It'll be easier. Thank you. So David HaMelech's entire life was war. Not in a bad way, in the best way possible, but still, it was war. And the Beit HaMikdash was a place of peace. And someone whose life was involved with killing other people, even for the best and most valuable and most honorable reasons, could not be the one to build the Beit HaMikdash. King Solomon was the leader and the monarch during the time when the Jewish people were completely at peace, because David HaMelech had established such a powerful position in the world where nobody was able or willing or even remotely interested in starting up with the Jewish people, because the Jewish people were so prominent and so powerful, and he placed the Jewish people at such a powerful position that Shlomo HaMelech did not have to engage in war. And his reign was a reign of peace. And therefore, he was the one to build the Beit HaMikdash. In fact, he didn't even use any of the materials that his father had accumulated, because there should never be even the remotest idea that anyone would think that the materials that King David had gathered were spoils from war. And nobody should ever think that the holy temple of the Jewish people, the holy temple in Jerusalem, was actually built with materials that were stolen or taken from enemies, which they weren't. But because the whole concept of the Beit HaMikdash was one of peace, shalom, purity, there could not be any connection with anything remotely negative, remotely blood related, or any type of war. And this idea helps us understand not just what the Beit HaMikdash was, but also what it represented to the rest of the world. When the Jewish people came to the Holy Temple, when the Jewish people would visit the Beit HaMikdash, which it was a mitzvah to come to Jerusalem from all around Israel, wherever the Jews were, on 3 occasions during the year. 3 major holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, which are called the Shalosh Regalim. Shalosh Regalim literally means the 3 regalim, regalim coming from the word regel, which is a foot, because they would walk. They would walk, there would be a big pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and they would all come to visit the temple during those 3 holidays. Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Yom Kippur, that's a good question. Yom Kippur, those who were in the temple there was a very powerful service that took place in the temple. But the time when everyone would travel there was for the longer holidays and joyous holidays. Yom Kippur is a very powerful, solemn day, but it's not a joyous day. So it was the time when the Jews would come to Jerusalem. They would celebrate as a nation, and they would bring offerings, many different rituals related to that. So the feeling of connection and unity and peace was so prevalent in the Beit Hamikdash. And not only would the Jewish people come to the Beit Hamikdash, of course, those in Jerusalem would attend the Beit Hamikdash services 3 times a day, like attending synagogue. Imagine, instead of coming to shul, you went to the Beit Hamikdash. That's what we're yearning for. That's what we're waiting for. This is why we're learning. This is why we're celebrating. So the Beit Hamikdash was actually a place for people from all walks of life to come to. Jews and non-Jews alike would come to the Beit Hamikdash because it served as a place, a physical space where Hashem's presence was concentrated. Now, Hashem's presence is everywhere. We all know the song, Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere, right? Preschool teachers, up, down, right, left, and all around. There we go. So the presence of God is equally everywhere in the world. But there are spaces where God's presence is more openly revealed and can be more openly felt. For example, a synagogue is a holier place, so to speak, than a supermarket. Safe to say that, right? Now, does that mean God is not in the supermarket? No, God is everywhere. But God's presence is more felt and is more revealed in a synagogue versus a supermarket. When a woman is in the mikvah versus when a woman is in a swimming pool, God's presence is more concentrated in that space. In the land of Israel, God's presence can be felt stronger than in the land of Miami, right? Yeah. That doesn't mean that God is not here or more there. It's that God's presence can be felt more. So the Beit HaMikdash was built piggybacking off the Mishkan that was built when the Jews were in the desert, and as we said, was in Israel until the permanent structure of the Beit HaMikdash was built. That was a place where Jews and non-Jews alike could come and connect with God in a way that physicality and spirituality would merge, because it's a physical space, but it is replete with miracles. It is full of spirituality that you can see, that you can touch, that you can taste, that it envelops you. And that is what the Beit HaMikdash represented. It represented the purest form of holiness in a way that united everybody, in a way that made everybody equally feel spiritual, which is why the Beit HaMikdash had to be built by a person who personified peace, with materials that were only peaceful, because all of King Solomon's coffers were not at all filled with spoils of war. In fact, they were all from gifts that people would bring to the king. Every other nation in the world wanted to be in the good graces of the royal King Shlomo, King Solomon, and they would bring gifts from love and respect and awe. And that was how King Solomon's coffers were filled. And that was what was used to build the Beit HaMikdash. So we see the contrast of war versus peace. And every part of the Beit HaMikdash had to personify peace. Every part of the Beit HaMikdash had to personify purity. Now, here's something interesting. The Beit HaMikdash was made from stone. It was made with the most beautiful Jerusalem stone. But how do you cut stone? Well, you're going like this. Yeah, that's how you would think you should cut. A pick and a hammer. Does that sound like a peaceful tool? Well, here we go. No weapons or sharp objects or anything that could be used for something negative could be used for the building of the Mishkan. So how did they cut the stones?
They just picked them the way they were.
You ever try doing that to build a structure the size of it? Okay. Well, let me tell you what they actually did, because Tamar, you're right. There was a very rare worm. Yes, I said a worm. It was called the shamir. It was a very miraculous creation that would crawl along the stone and cut in the most calm, peaceful way. In case you were wondering why God created worms, now you know. I mean, it wasn't like a worm that we think of it like now, like, you know, an earthworm that I say ew and little boys love to collect, you know. But thankfully my boys haven't discovered that idea. But there was this shamir, and it would slide along the stones and cut them. Even the construction of the temple was in the most peaceful way. And the many, many workers who were involved in the construction of the temple were all very, very honored to be part of this journey. They were very, very spiritually connected with the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And it was all done in the spirit of peace, with unity. Now, I don't know about you, but I have never seen a construction zone that I walked away and was like, wow, that was really calm, friendly, peaceful. But that was the construction of the Beit HaMikdash.
Like that.
And this was how the first Beit HaMikdash was built in the time of King Solomon. And it was the most beautiful, the most exquisite, majestic structure. And everyone flocked to the Beit HaMikdash. Inside the Beit HaMikdash, there were many different compartments, many different areas. And we're not going to go through the details of every single part of the Beit HaMikdash, but I do have something coming up within the next few weeks that will give us more insight into that. And the process of the service of the Beit HaMikdash, every day when the Jews would enter in the Beit HaMikdash, that feeling of peace and beauty was felt as well. So what was the day-to-day in the Beit HaMikdash? Well, there were many, many sacrifices that were brought on the altar. So the Beit HaMikdash had three areas. There was the outer area, which was where there was the women's section and the men's section, and where the prayers were held, and where the sacrifices were done on this immense, beautiful mizbeach on the altar. And that was a public space, and everybody would come and pray and sing together. And the Levites, the Leviim, would stand on the steps. There were 15 steps leading up to the middle chamber, the inner hall of the Beit HaMikdash, and they would stand on the steps and they would sing with musical instruments. It was beautiful. And there was the wash basin for the Kohanim, for the priests to do their service, and inside was the Heichal. Now, the Heichal was the inner room, not the inner sanctum, but the room inside where the Kohanim would perform the service and the Leviim would assist where needed. And inside there was the menorah, which was lit daily. There was the smaller altar on which the incense, the spices and oil, sacrifice of the oil and the spices was brought daily. And where the shulchan, the table with the shelves where the lechem hapanim, the holy bread, was placed as well. And that was inside the heichal, the hall. And every day, morning and afternoon, the Kohen would bring the incense. So you imagine just this sweet smelling, beautiful, aromatic atmosphere. The menorah was lit daily by the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. Imagine the high priest, the holiest of men, dressed in these exquisite garments, lighting the menorah. And it says that the light of the menorah would emanate and glow and shine to all of Jerusalem. This glorious light, a physical light that became spiritual. And there was this beautiful display of the lechem hapanim, the breads. And then there was this gorgeous curtain. There was a wall-to-wall curtain. And behind that was the inner sanctuary. In that space, which was called the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, was the Aron, the Holy Ark. Now, in the Ark were the tablets, the Torah. And in the space of the Kodesh HaKodashim, the laws of physics were suspended. To the point that when the construction of the Kodesh HaKodashim was built, and again, my numbers are going to be off, so we're just going to put the ratio into the real numbers if you want to look it up. But let's say the space was 10 feet. It wasn't 10 feet. I'm just making up a number. The space was 10 feet. And let's say the Holy Ark was 4 feet. It wasn't, but let's just say. The idea is true. The numbers are off. If you have an ark that measures 4 feet in length in the middle of a room that measures 10 feet in length, if you were to measure from one wall to the ark, how much space would you have? How much? Very good. So if it was in the middle and it's 4 and the whole space is 10, you would have 3 on one side, 3 on the other side, because 3 plus 4 plus 3 equals 10. That's basic laws of physics and space and math. When the room was measured 10 feet, from wall to Aron, 5 feet. Wall to Aron, 5 feet. 5 and 5 is 10. The Aron, still the same space. It did not take up any physical space. It didn't take up physical space. It was a physical object with spiritual dimensions. It was the most spiritual experience. And the only one who entered the Holy of Holies was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. But even though the Jews never entered the space, the holiness of that space emanated forth to all of the temple and by extension, all of Jerusalem, all of Israel, and the entire world. So this temple was this incredible spiritual presence that made God feel at home in the world and made us feel God in the world. Beit Hamikdash comes from the word bet, meaning bayit, a home. This doesn't sound like someone's house, but it was. It is God's home in this world. The holiest space where God has a home to rest his physical presence, where the Shekhinah was actually seen. They could see a cloud above the Mishkan. When the Jews were in the desert, the way they knew that God's presence was settled and dwelling in the Mishkan was because they saw the cloud. They saw God's presence. And in the Beit HaMikdash, God's presence could be felt so tangibly. It was such a holy space. And that purity and that divinity had so much value because it represented everything that was the best of Judaism. It represented everything that our Torah stands for in a physical space. And the Beit HaMikdash that was built by King Solomon, the first Beit HaMikdash, stood until it was destroyed by the Babylonians, by King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel, who destroyed the temple. The destruction began with the Jews being locked into Jerusalem when the siege was started, which takes place on the 10th of Tevet, thank you. The 10th of Tevet, I don't know, I'm thinking Shvat, I'm like, that's wrong. The 10th of Tevet, and over 10 months, the Jews were under siege. And then the temple was destroyed. And fast forward many years after the destruction of the temple, when the Jews were in exile, the Jews lobbied to have the Beit HaMikdash rebuilt. And it was rebuilt by a group of Jews. And it was not the same majestic structure as it was the first time around until King Herod built and renovated the construction. And then it was even more majestic and glamorous and magnificent than even the first one. The holiness of the first one far surpassed the second one. But the second Beit HaMikdash had this grandeur that was incredible. And that Beit HaMikdash as well was destroyed, following the same timeline. And that wasn't the end of it. There is a third Beit HaMikdash. And we are waiting for that Beit HaMikdash to be built. But we are not going to physically build it. God is physically building it. We are spiritually building it. We are building the Beit HaMikdash with every single mitzvah that we do. And every good action that we do is building the Beit HaMikdash a little bit more, brick by brick. And what we're waiting for and praying for and hoping for and working towards is the coming of Mashiach, when the third Beit HaMikdash will be built. And it's been a really long time since we had a Beit HaMikdash, but you know what? It's going to be worth the wait, because that one will not be destroyed. That one will be eternal. And that's what we're waiting for. So now that we understand just a little bit, and this is only a taste of the beauty and the glory and the presence of what the Beit HaMikdash was in Jewish life, we can really understand why we're sad that it was destroyed. Why are we so sad that it was destroyed? And why do we need to learn about it now? Which brings us to the 3 weeks. We are now in the times of the mourning of the temple, but in the calendar, this was the day, tomorrow, when the beginning of the destruction began, when the enemies broke through the walls and entered Jerusalem. And the Jewish people had been under siege for so long that they were weak, they were starving, they were so depleted that they could barely even fight back. It was so tragic because they had been under siege for 10 months. No food had gone in and out, and at some point the food ran out. And it was so tragic and so difficult. And at the same time, there's still that 3-week period until the Beit Hamikdash was actually burnt. And what do we do during this time? Well, there are many things that we're not allowed to do. So first of all, many of the things that we're not allowed to do during the time of Sefirat HaOmer, we also do not do during the time period of the 3 weeks, starting tonight, tomorrow, until the day after Tisha B'Av. So I'm going to go overview in general. I will also post a very detailed list on the chat that you can just keep handy, what you're allowed to do during the 3 weeks and the 9 days on Tisha B'Av, all of that. But in general, we don't listen to music, which, by the way, anyone who works with children, then it's okay to have music playing for the children, but not for your own personal enjoyment. So we switch to the a cappella tracks. If anyone needs the a cappella playlists, by the way, I have many. But if you go on Spotify and you search Whispers of the Heart by Benny Friedman, you'll thank me. The best a cappella music. Now, that was just a side note. That it's not a mitzvah to listen to that, but I highly recommend it. It's beautiful, and it's also in the spirit of yearning and feeling. So I'll post the link on there. It's like Spotify's already recommending it for me. It's perfect. And at the same time, we also don't have weddings. We don't cut hair. And we don't make the blessing of She'achianu, and we don't do any of these joyous celebratory things. Bar mitzvah could be held, or anything that's on the birthday, but we don't have weddings or things like that. Engagement parties that take place should not have music, etc. And on Rosh Chodesh Av, which is 9 days before Tisha B'Av, which is basically sort of halfway through, a little more than halfway through the 3 weeks, then the 9 days becomes a lot more strict. So we don't do all of those things. And as well, we also do not drink wine, eat meat. We don't wear clean clothes. So if you need to do laundry, then, step on it before you put it on. We don't take long hot showers, so just bathe yourself to a minimum. And we don't go swimming or go on any long trips or vacations during that time. And in general, it's a time period where God's attribute of severity is stronger. So we don't want to put ourselves in more dangerous or risky positions, God forbid. And there's a lot of don'ts. So what do we do? What do we do? Well, the Lubavitcher Rebbe taught us what this time period is all about. This is not the time to get sucked into sadness. This is the time to focus on building. Instead of just being sad that we don't have a Beit Hamikdash, we have to prepare ourselves and get ready for the building of the Beit Hamikdash. So why do we learn about the Beit Hamikdash? In fact, there's a custom to learn, and we will learn some of the laws of building the Beit Hamikdash during this time. Why do we need to know these laws? Well, let me ask you something. Imagine I told you, you are going to be making an art project. And these are the exact instructions. And you're making this art project in 4 years. Are you going to be paying attention to every piece of the instructions if you have to do it in 4 years? Yes or no? What do you think? No. Okay, maybe you'll skim through it if you're interested, but you're not committed to memory and really be focused on it. I'll think 4 years from now, right? Like now I have much better things to do. The same is with any other plan that you have. If it's not, in Hebrew we say it's not nogea, if it's not applicable, if it doesn't have anything to do with anything actionable right now, Who cares? There is an entire section of halacha dedicated to the laws of the Beit Hamikdash, building the Beit Hamikdash, the sacrifices in the Beit Hamikdash, the laws of the Beit Hamikdash. And guess what? If we think we're never going to need them, because is built fine when Mashiach comes in a very long time, eventually, then we'll learn the laws. The Rebbe says no. If we really believe that the Beit HaMikdash is going to be built now, then we need to learn the laws now. We need to be able to tell God, not first send me the Beit HaMikdash, then I'll learn the laws. No, Hashem, I already know what to do. I'm ready. I'm ready to start the craft right now. I know all the instructions perfectly. Not in 4 years from now. If I want to do it now, if I really believe that I'm going to be doing it now, I'm going to learn it. I'm going to treat it as something serious. You're going to get the recipe for the cake you want to bake today. Not the cake you're going to bake in 5 years from now. 5 years from now, you're going to bake your anniversary. If I'm going to start saying, okay, I really would love this cake for my 20th anniversary. You think I'm going to find the recipe now? No. God willing, I have plenty of time to get to my 20th anniversary. If it's a cake I want to build for Shabbat, if I want to bake for Shabbat, you bet I'm going to get the recipe now. It's already Wednesday night because I believe that it's Shabbat. And I believe that I want to have that cake for dessert. With the same belief that I know I want to have that chocolate cake on my Shabbat table, and I know exactly that Shabbat is in X amount of days and it comes every week, so I know for sure it's coming. There's no doubt in my mind that it's coming and it's coming now. That's the same type of belief that we have to have about the building of the third Beit HaMikdash. I want to know everything there is to know about the Beit HaMikdash so that I can be ready and I can feel that it's something applicable in my life. It's something that actually means something. It's not just something theoretical. It's something real. We don't only learn the laws that are historical, because if you think about it, the Rambam, Maimonides, who put together all of the halacha in the form of applicable Jewish law, he lived long after the destruction of the temple. Temple 1 and Temple 2. So why did he put the laws of the Beit HaMikdash into halacha that we learn on a cycle every year when we learn the Sefer HaMitzvot and we learn the Rambam, we learn Maimonides, and we learn all these mitzvahs? Why do we have to learn it? Because we believe that we're going to need it. If we don't think we're going to need it, we're never going to learn it. So that's why we need to do it, so that we can believe. And that because we believe, we learn. But not only that. The more we learn about the Beit HaMikdash, the more we feel how lacking we are in our lives without it. And of course we have synagogues. And of course we have spirituality in our lives. Of course we have that. And we're not negating the spirituality in our lives. In fact, when God commanded the building of the Mishkan, it says, V'asu li mikdash, v'shachanti b'tocham. That is the pasuk that says. And if we translate that, it says, V'asu li mikdash, make for me a temple, v'shachanti b'tocham. Now, I love grammar, so this is fascinating to me. V'shachanti means, and I will dwell. B'tocham means inside them. God tells the leader of the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu, build a temple, and I will dwell in them. Now, grammatically, it should say, and I will dwell in it, in the temple. Build the temple, and I will dwell in it. It should have said, b'tocho. I will dwell in it. So why does it say, and I will dwell in them? Well, our commentaries explain that God is saying, and I will dwell inside each and every one of them. Within each one of us, we have our own little temple. We have inside our souls our own temple, and in our homes, our Jewish homes. And we spoke about this at length in our class about the sacred spaces and the Jewish home, making it a sacred home. That is the microcosm of the Holy Temple. So of course we have spirituality in our lives and we can feel godliness in our lives, but it's not enough. It's not enough. We want a space where we can go and see this glorious, most majestic building, a physical building where Hashem's Shekhinah, Hashem's physical presence can be felt, where we can see the holy ark, and we can see the holy menorah, and we can see the sacrifices being brought, and we can hear the songs of the Leviim, not just in our minds, not just when we sing the words of Tehillim, but actually hearing the voices of the songs that were sung in the temple. That we can see the majesty of God in a physical space. We want that. We need that. And you know what? We need to make sure that we deserve that. That's what's most important. That in the times of the 3 weeks, when we're focused on sadness, yes, we're focused on loss, we're focused on destruction, but that cannot be the end all be all, because if our goal and our focus is only on the destruction, then we get lost in the negativity. And the purpose of mourning the loss is so that we could want to rebuild. You know, there's a phrase that's given when somebody passes away. This is a phrase that the Rebbe said after his wife, Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, whose name I carry. After she passed away, the Rebbe said, "V'hachai yitain el libo." And I'm using that as well to dedicate, as I said, tonight's class, which means that those who are living should take to heart, which the Rebbe explained that what keeps the person who has passed away alive is when those who are alive follow and uphold their legacy and do things in their memory and do things in their honor and maintain the values that they brought into the world and that they held in their lives. So the idea is that when we mourn the loss of a person, how do we keep them alive? By following in their footsteps, which basically means that the loss has to fuel growth in order for it to be meaningful. In order for the person not to get sucked into the grief and the negativity, and that doesn't mean they don't feel it, God forbid. Of course, grief is very painful and very sad and should be felt, but it has to lead to action in order for this negativity not to suck a person in. And the same is with the loss of the Beit Hamikdash and the destruction of the temple. Our focus cannot just be on the negativity. It has to be on, and now what? The temple was destroyed, and therefore, what am I doing to rebuild it? And there is a powerful story about that idea. But that's how we're going to start next week's class. So if anyone has any questions, to be continued. I don't usually say that the classes are continued. And if you missed tonight's class or if you're listening to it after or whatever it is, you'll still be able to follow. But you should know there's a good story starting tomorrow's class, next week's class. Anyone have any questions? Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar with 2 Z's. I don't know how to say it in Spanish. I barely know how to pronounce it in English. He was from Babylon. Yes. And the second temple was destroyed by the Romans. Yes. The third, we're waiting for it to be rebuilt and it will not be destroyed. But you know what? But wait, don't worry, because there were 2 temples. Yeah. But next week's class, we're going to focus on the historical timeline a little bit. We're going to get more into detail about that. 2. Yes. Any other questions? Ladies on Zoom, unmute yourself if you have anything to share, anything you want to add. I don't see her. Oh, yeah, there she is. Esther, don't worry. Belina's looking out for you.
And Fanny, she said she was gonna be.
Fanny is here. Yes.
Hi. Sorry, just in the middle of cooking stuff already.
And not getting as close as we should. Not having that, like, now we don't have a temple,
Right.
right? So we now have to work on the mitzvahs to get close to Hashem,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what I'm saying is, do you think that part of the destruction was part of like having it, and having that? Just like. Into the Beit Hamikdash.
That's such a good question. You know what? The truth is that definitely is an element. Next week, we're going to discuss why the temple was destroyed and all of that. We're going to get into that a lot more deeply. But we can't even imagine being so used to something like that we could even get desensitized, right? Like that's just like but 100%, like that, like they started taking. Now, the beauty and the splendor, of course, there were many people of all different levels of observance, at every stage. But what never changed was the concentration of holiness, whether or not it was felt. But because it was felt in such a tangible way, even if it was taken for granted, Hashem never distanced himself. So if a person felt the distance, that was only coming from within themselves, but they could always come back close because Hashem was the constant. After the temple was destroyed, and now in our lives, Hashem's presence is still in the world the same way, but it's covered up with so many more layers of impurity that we need to find it because Hashem is hiding. Hashem is hiding in this world. Now, you ever played hide and seek?
Yeah.
The game is called hide and seek. It's only fun to play if someone's looking. If no one's looking for you, you're just stuck in a closet. You're just you're not actually playing. No, exactly. The saddest thing is when someone's playing hide and seek and they stop looking. Why does Hashem hide? Because he wants us to look for him. So yes, Hashem hid himself in the destruction of the temple because Hashem felt that we needed to really start looking for him. So 100%, and it had to come from us even more. 100%. Yes, sure.
Do I remember correctly that there were measurements? No.
100%. Every single detail of the Beit Hamikdash is written in exact detail with every measurement, every number, every length, every width, 100%. The Mishkan, the temple that was built in the desert, is detailed every single element in the Chumash, and in the Beit Hamikdash was built in the times of King Solomon. That is as well in very, very specific detail, not in the Chumash, but as well in other parts of the Torah, detailed very specifically. Right. Yes, it was built on a very, very specific scale. Yes.
Why did you say the Chumash?
Because the Chumash, the stories in the Chumash go from the times of when the world was created until the passing of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the timeline of the 5 books of the Chumash. And after that, the Torah extends with the books of the prophets, and there's exactly.
If you keep on reading the Torah, there's also the other books.
In a Torah scroll, we have the 5 books that go until the passing of Moshe Rabbeinu. That is the timeline of the Torah, and the rest of the books continue the story. All part of the Torah, but not in the Chumash. On that note,